This is Kanan, and BYU Hawaii is trying to kick him out for celebrating his culture. Let's get into it.
Hello everybody, welcome once again to AfriPost. I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're doing great. Now, one thing that has been talked about a lot in the United States is the cases of high racial discrimination, especially against Black Americans. And this discrimination has permeated into institutions of higher learning. In fact, universities are struggling to find a way through which they can have racial diversity addressed within even their faculties. But this is something that they are struggling and it has never been achieved to date. So what is going on? There is this case where a student in BYU Hawaii University was kind of confronted and he was told to do certain things that, if you really try to analyze, they tend to be racial targeting against him. I want us to watch this video, then react to it after the video. Kindly watch.
This is Kanan, and BYU Hawaii is trying to kick him out for celebrating his culture. Let's get into it. Kanan has been at BYU Hawaii since fall of 2023, and he has never caused any issues, never broken any rules. He's a good student, and he's a returned missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In spite of all of this, Kanan's enrollment is still under threat because of the color of his skin and because of his desire to celebrate his heritage as an Afro-Guyanese man. Now, before we get into the story, you should know that BYU has what's called an honor code, which is basically a code of morals or ethics that students are expected to follow in order to remain students at the university. This includes no smoking, no drinking, no tattoos, no coffee, and no sex before marriage. BYU dorms have chaperones who enforce curfew and visitor rules for residents. Kanan had been living in one of these dorms for a few months when he was approached by a chaperone and made to produce his student ID in order to prove that he was a student at the university. This is a classic example of racial profiling because your average white student at BYU is not going to have to prove that they're a student of the university, especially if they're on their way to their dorm room. The chaperone then told him that he needed to cut all of his locks off in order to adhere to BYU rules. There's no rule that prohibits having locks, and when Kanan refused this, he was reported to administration. Since then, BYU Hawaii administration has been trying to quietly force Kanan to cut his locks in order to conform to these unwritten rules that apply to Black students at BYU. Kanan spoke with people in the Honor Code office and the vice president of student life at BYU Hawaii, and they told him that he had to comply because they were entitled to have these rules and that it would be unfair to other students who couldn't have long hair. Here are the actual dress and grooming standards taken directly from BYU Hawaii's website. For grooming, it says that hair should be neat, clean, modest, and avoid extremes in styles and colors. Men's hair should be neatly trimmed. Men should be clean shaven. If worn, mustaches should be neatly trimmed. Kanan visits a loctician monthly to keep his locks neat and clean, and he visits a barber twice a month in order to make sure that he is well groomed at all times. He is 100% within his rights to keep his locks, and administration knows this. That's why they've been using some pretty shady tactics to try and get him to cut his hair. At first, he was told that his appearance was a distraction, but then they dialed it back and said it was just the length that was the problem, and that was distracting students. Kanan suggested that if his hair was the distraction, he could cover it. That was rejected. He also suggested that he could wear his hair up or that he could cut 2 inches off of the ends. And both of those ideas were rejected as well. And they insist that he needs to cut all of his hair off. Now, BYU Hawaii is far more diverse than its mainland counterparts, BYU Idaho and BYU Provo, and they celebrate culture a lot more readily there than they would at these other universities. There's even an entire cultural center paid for by the LDS Church that highlights and celebrates Polynesian culture, even though there are technically aspects of that culture that do not adhere to written rules of the church, like tribal tattoos. Now, I want to iterate that what someone wants to do with their body should not be a church's business, and I think that is a wonderful part of Polynesian culture that they have tribal tattoos, but technically it is against the rules of the church. Here's a photo taken directly from the church's website that talks about how tattoos are discouraged by prophets. When Kanan pointed out that his locks were a representation of his culture as an Afro-Guyanese man, he was told that they had been patient with him up to this point, but now he was trying to push his own agenda and be defiant. This is the vice president of student life at BYU Hawaii. His name is Jonathan Kalaonalani Kao, and he has some crazy stuff to say about this situation. To kick it off, he told Kanan that dress and grooming standards at the university needed to be adhered to regardless of culture. When Kanan pointed out the obvious double standard here, then he was told that the appearance standards would be more strict depending on someone's genetics. That's crazy. I'm not even sure if that qualifies as a dog whistle because it's so blatant, but if it is a dog whistle, that's a Saint Bernard, Great Dane, Irish Wolfhound type of whistle. That's a wolf whistle at this point. To say that rules apply to people differently based on their genetics, and you're talking to a black man, Come on, Jonathan. Finally, that vice president told Kanan that he would not be allowed to remain a part of the BYU Hawaii community unless he cut all of his hair off. Keep in mind that there is no written rule against having locks or long hair. This is a clear example of a religious university using its power and privatized status to discriminate against people with certain genetics. When Black ministers heard about this, we had to say something, because we will not stand for discrimination in any form. We will not stand for racism in any form. And we want Kanan to be able to remain at BYU Hawaii and get the education that he is owed. All of those who are threatening Kanan's education simply because he chooses to celebrate his culture by wearing locks need to be held accountable, and this should not be gotten away with. Please share this video and tag BYU Hawaii in every social media platform that you have, because this is flat out discrimination and it should not be tolerated.
Now, after watching that clip, you'd understand that the young boy there, he was living his life in university as anybody would want. But then, because he's in a university that is mostly white, he perceives something that is not reasonable. Why is it that he's being asked to produce his ID to just identify himself whether he is a student of the university? But then, forget about that. Why is it that he's being given new rules that do not exist in the university? Because since when did having locks become a problem? For me, I think it is not something that is reasonable, that anybody can come and tell you that for us to have an easier engagement with you, you must have your locks cut. I tried to really do my research, and I found that even beards cannot be kept in this university. If you are planning to have beards, then you're not allowed to be in that university. So it seems, since it has a Christian background, there is a higher percentage through which people think that they can define the morals for anybody or any student who is in that institution. But then, how deep is this question of racial diversity or racial discrimination in American universities? There have been incidences where racial targeted attacks have been directed to universities. For instance, in 2017, there was this attack at University of Virginia where white nationalists invaded the campus, and it sparked the hate crimes and racial incidences that always hate many universities. So this was a point where many people started getting concerned about whether our universities, especially those in the United States, are safe for blacks. Because if you look at it, you'd understand that not many blacks get an opportunity to go to universities and even have a degree. In fact, many of the universities are dominated by whites, and it is much easier for a white person to get a college degree than a black person because of the systemic racism that has existed and a lot of social determinants that affect how they grow up. That is why it is stated that an average white family is 10 times richer than an average black family, and therefore having an opportunity to go and pay your tuition, to go and pay for your school fees, it becomes a challenge for a black family. And therefore, if a black person gets an opportunity to be at a university, that should be a plus. But then you find that these institutions are not equipped to deal with these problems of racial discrimination as it has been demonstrated. It has also been identified that most of the universities in the United States also have disparity in disciplinary actions that they take. You'd realize that a black person, when they commit a crime or even an incident that happens, they can be subjected to a lot of problems. In fact, sometimes their studies can even be terminated. But if you weigh the same problem committed by a white person, the university can kind of give a lighter punishment in that case. So this adds to the question of racial discrimination and lack of preparation for American universities to fully address the question of racial discrimination as it has been demonstrated also. As I also stated earlier, the problem of faculty diversity, because most lecturers tend to be white. So having black faculty members becomes a problem because those who are learned, much of them are whites, and therefore it really pushes that since whites are the majority of the population in the United States, they will dominate many of the institutions of learning. But regardless of the actions that universities have taken, they have failed to achieve faculty diversity because they have not employed many black people in their faculty. And therefore, these lecturers, if any of them is having any racial judgment, the black students are highly likely to suffer. So these are some of the challenges that are affecting our students in the United States. Many of these black students find it rough in these institutions. The case of BYU is really appalling for me because a young child or a young student should be given space to learn, regardless of the outlook that he has, because I don't think university is a place where you're going to judge somebody on the morals. It's not a place whereby you're going to say that because you are dressed this way, because you are having this kind of characters, because you are made up in this manner, you cannot be our student. So that is a case of racial discrimination that has been plainly demonstrated in an American university. Please, I don't know what to think about this topic. Do you really think there is some recourse that should be taken to this university? Because for me, I feel like the young boy really faced some rough time there. And this cannot even encourage anybody or any black person who wants to go and have an education in that institution. It would be discouraging because they will see like, I don't want to go and learn in a place whereby I will be subjected to a moral life monitoring that will be working against my own wishes. Please tell us down in the comment section what you think about the topic. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you have not subscribed. Like this video and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.